Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to do a horror movie double feature review. Firstly, I'm going to go on and do the very non-spoilerish, cryptic-like talk of both of these films. Of course, talking about Abigail first and then Tarot. Then, of course, when we go into full-on spoilers and I talk about the whole entire film, every bit of it, I am, of course, going to approach talking about Tarot first because it's the newer film, and then you can go ahead and fast forward to the point where I am to move the camera, and I'm going to then just talk full on spoilers about Abigail. That's how I'm going to approach this video because, of course, it being a double feature review. So, with that said, I feel like I'm still gonna kind of one and the other when we even get to the non-spoiler part, and here's where we're gonna go about that. So, Abigail. Abigail did have a lot of twists and turns with it, and ultimately was a movie that I did enjoy. Really, just because it had a lot of twists and turns in it, and it did remind me of two other films while I was watching it. So, solid, good movie. Really did enjoy it. And within the first seconds of Abigail, I'm like, okay, this reminded me of the movie Don't Breathe. If you've ever not gone on and not seen this movie, it of course is about a film where burglars try to make their way into a blind man's home and chaos ensues. That's what Abigail first reminded me of. And I've even gone on to review Don't Breathe at some point in this channel. You can check that out if you'd like to. But also, this movie did go on and remind me of the original Quentin Tarantino, George Clooney From Dusk Till Dawn movie, realizing that there are other movies that were to have been after that and a TV show, but still, the very original From Dusk Till Dawn movie was to be fairly similar to Abigail to me. And then just a cluster of just kind of horror haunted house movies. But there were at some points for me in Abigail where I did have a couple of good laughs, and I kind of questioned whether or not I should have laughed during this film. Abigail, of course, some people might be asking, like, well, is it a scary film because I haven't seen it yet? And I would honestly say no. To me, it was not a scary film. There may be, like, a few maybe gross out moments, but, like, I really didn't think it was scary at all. But, like, I don't think for this film that that's necessarily a bad thing. Really, I think this movie doesn't really give you anybody to absolutely root for because you're kind of either wanting the villain or villains to succeed because there technically is no good guy in this movie. But then you're just kind of enjoying the ride of this film. And really, yeah, solid, good film. Thought that really people should definitely check it out. I know currently right now Abigail is available for $20 some on Amazon, but I will go on and give you an app right now that you can be able to go out of your way to see Abigail for absolutely free. An app called Zelifonic, Zlivonic, as well as also recommending the exact same thing for Tarot, even though Tarot is kind of the way it's released right now on that app. The quality isn't all that good, but really at some point when this movie does get to a streaming partner, the quality, of course, will be much better for you to see Tarot. But if you want to just kind of see Tarot anyways, you can see that there, Zelifonic for absolutely free. Tarot. Tarot was to go on and remind me of a bunch of horror card game, board game like horror movies. Like, plus also it just reminds me a lot of generic horror movie stuff. Really, there are a couple of jump scares in this film, but really, this movie is very slow. It's an hour and 25 minutes, but man, is it slow. Man, you have to just wait for those scares. But man, when they come, they probably will get you. Uh, really, the thing that brought me into the tarot movie was really just the theme. I have been waiting for I don't know how long for there to be a tarot card film, and once this delivered, I was like, oh my god, this is great. And then when I went into the movie, I honestly was really disappointed. Because yeah, you get tarot cards, like it's not the like there's two different kinds of tarot cards. There's like the sun and the moon and the lover and the death card and the kind of the very basic kind of tarot cards, but then there's also the other kind of tarot cards where it's the uh the death card and the fool and the swords and kind of the very more old fashioned kind of tarot card approach. And that's where this movie, of course, goes into, especially if you have not gone on and seen either the movie or any of the trailers. And so, really, for the tarot movie, I do really want to go on and say that this movie is interesting, but really not enough for me to want to thumbs up it. It feels like a bad film, and once we get towards the end part of the film, I immediately groan really heavily towards the end. I'm like, oh, okay, you have the well-named actor that is to be placed in this film, and you have to just kind of come up with some reason for well-named actor to still be at some point a part of movie. But yeah, really, I also was to honestly want all the characters to really just die towards the end of the film. Because I thought that that was the better ending. And maybe if there is an alternate take of this film, maybe they do have a an alternate take of that. Maybe beyond just the theatrical version of this movie. But yeah, I don't like that because, in all honesty, when it comes down to every single one of the characters, it's seemingly having them being cursed. I was like, all right, well, all of them are just going to straight up die. Like, they have to just avoid this thing, kind of like Final Destination. And it really doesn't 100% go that route because the order is kind of all just kind of scrambled of who actually is to go when they go. Uh, as far as kind of movie comparison, I would have to probably go with the Robert Englund, The Midnight Man, which actually is a really good film. Or really also like the 100 Candle Game movie. Or really, there's just been a lot of board game-esh horror films that I had gone on to, I think, specifically have a playlist for. But if you kind of also look at my horror things, maybe at some point something might have slipped through the cracks in there also. But yeah, I've at some point done some death game reviews, some triggers, and all kinds of other things. But yeah, so tarot honestly just feels very generic horror and very disappointing. But more than likely, regardless, people are probably going to want to go on and go into full on spoiler mode for this review and hear what I have to say, regardless about how the movie plays out. So, with that said, yeah, disappointing is really the grading of tarot. Like, it really is to just have me say it's a bad film. It really is. It could be so bad that it's good and people just want to see it and just love the film. I really could just say there was a number of movies that I could have seen besides it. There really was. Like, really, the horror end of it, like, comes off as very, like, Five Nights at Freddy's for me. to where I'm like, where are all the kills? They happen off screen. Great. Another one of these kind of films. And yeah, there were some jump scares in this one. I did get scared, but it was a lot of just like, oh, like the monster is coming from behind the character, or in front of the character, or in the side of the character, or like that's how all the horror jumps were. When you would have to kind of clock them on your watch to just be like, okay, you coming yet? Are you gonna jump yet? Because I know you're either gonna come from here or here. Like, let's get this batter to just swing a little bit. But yeah, really, I think that Taro also, like, for the movie was really just milked out. It was sad. But yeah, so let's go on and let's, regardless, go into full on spoilers and talk about Taro. And so, with that said, I'm going to go on and I'm going to get the cast list upon my phone. And so, with that, I'm going to pause here and then get on with the cast list and whatever notes, of course, I am to have to, for mostly Taro. Whatever, of course, is to be for Abigail is whatever is to be mostly in my noggin, because whatever I have gone on to say about Abigail was mostly for the non-spoilerish like stuff, but there might be some kind of funny things that I am to possibly bring up maybe in the spoilers of Abigail. So with that said, let me pause here and we'll get into full-on spoilers about Taro. All right, spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time. Whew, spoilers. Let's go into Taro. So the very beginning of Taro, we just have a number of people at this campfire, and they're all like going through like a yearbook kind of approach of like, well, hey, who is more likely to have kids? Who is more likely um, to become rich and famous? Who is more likely to this? Who's more likely to that? And at some point, we come down to this couple, both Haley and both uh, Grant, and the assessment about them is that, oh, like, well, they're going to become a couple, they're going to get married, they're going to have kids, and and both of this couple is to look at the rest of the group and just be like, yeah, about that, and they're like, oh no, and so that's where we kind of take some of the beats of story in this film is to have like one girl call the other and just be like, "Man, I can't believe that they're not going to work out. I can't believe that they're probably going to break up." And like, did you hear anything about it? No, I didn't hear anything about it. Or you kind of have the characters kind of separate and they have to go and they have to talk about the relationship thing because they just have to eat up some time here. Uh, but so, anyways, after we kind of have that kind of conversing around the campfire, we come to find out that our youngins have lost the ability to drink any more beer because all the beer has now been drank. So they make their way into this cabin going like, man, we got to find anywhere that there could possibly be beer, alcohol, maybe some kind of way for us to get some kind of high or something. So they go on and they realize that they find only like one can in the entire house. So they're like, well, we got to go everywhere in this house, even the one door that says keep out in it. And they have to like figure out a way to break the lock of that door and make their way into this basement, it seems. And once they get to the basement part, I'm like, this feels very much like the Chris Hemsworth movie Cabin in the Woods. And if you've never seen the Chris Hemsworth movie Cabin in the Woods, oh my god, is that just like the further and further, like you're very baffled about the movie at first, but then once you get kind of further in the film, it really comes out to just be some kind of one of a kind like masterpiece of a film. But whoever is to go on and probably see it also may have a drastically different opinion. Moving on. But the way I want to compare the scene to that is in Cabin in the Woods, in the basement, they have all these trinket like things that are to go on and possibly be like what's going to carry the rest of the story. And like it looks like there's a bunch of cursed artifacts and all kinds of things down in that basement. And we're like, okay, but where are the tarot cards going to come into play? And then of course we go on to have I think Paxton ends up going on and like, hey guys, look at this weird starred box that we have here. And that immediately has Haley, who's like, oh my god, these are tarot cards. And they're kind of very old fashioned, like they're painted, and like that's kind of fascinating. And we should just kind of do a tarot card reading. Because we come to find that Haley is to be very much into tarot cards. And I'm like, okay, immediately this girl is going to be Final Girl. Without question. I was like, this girl is going to obviously be Final Girl because she knows the most about the theme point to the film. We also come to find out later on in the movie where Haley is off kind of talking to one of her friends that Haley had gone on to try and read her mother's fortune when her mother was sick and ill in the hospital. And every time Haley would read her mother's fortune, it would read the death card. And so Haley was just like, well, like, death does go on and say that you're either going to have brand new beginnings or that you're going to die. And so, like, it's kind of tough to absolutely, like, say for sure, like, where that really is to go at certain points, I guess, with the readings. But so, anyways, and plus also, like, to try and curve a tarot card reading because people are getting paid to uh, talk to people for as long as they can. It's like, well, hey, no, it might mean new beginnings, and so give me the money that you were going to pay me for this reading, right? Open doors will happen for you. Come on, give me the money for this reading. Call me now for your free reading. But uh, so we have Haley that is to go on and read the fortunes to all of her friends, even though Paxton is to go on and at some point mention it's like, well, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to give a reading of the toilet in in the bathroom because I gotta go. But then he ends up getting scared by some bushes and uh, some trash cans outside as the door is to kind of close, and he's like, "Hey, what happened? What's going on?" Because cliche-ish horror movie. So Haley goes on to read the very first tarot fortune thing card, and she of course to read her friend Elisa first, who is to have her happy birthday upon this day, and it seems when she is to arrive upon her campus school room place, they're to have on some kind of poster board somewhere telling, oh, happy birthday to her. I'm like, man, like this just campus, I guess, all knows that this girl is to have a birthday today. And I just thought that that was kind of weird. Like, do they really go on and do they really do that in campuses? Or is this just a unique happening? Or maybe this girl is just uberly popular. Do not know. But we have Haley that goes on to read Elisis reading, and she is to have a middle card of the High Priestess. And immediately when I saw that card, I'm like, High Priestess doesn't immediately just jump out as a familiar card to me as tarot, but I guess that's a tarot card. But again, when they also say the words High Priestess, I'm like, well, like, there probably has to be a certain way if this person is going to get killed in this movie, like, but I hope that they try and do something that isn't going to be obvious, but they end up doing an obvious death. But I guess her death might be more interesting than others, but we'll get there. So, after Elisa's reading, we then, of course, move on to Madeline's reading. And we come to find that her card is to go on and tell her that she has the middle card of the Hanged Man. And I was like, wow. If we're really setting up all of this to eventually just go on to be how it's going to roll out in this film, I'm a little worried. But yeah, so we then get to, of course, the third card, and the third card is to be the magician. I'm like, okay, well, there's like a lot of possibilities how we can play this all out in the film. Like, man, there's like magician, like we could just have this person just disappear, and we could just do all kinds of stuff. And then the movie happens to where I'm like, okay, like, all right. So we then go on to, of course, Jacob, Jacob, who of course is Paxton's character, who has very much been a hesitant reader of sorts, who has gone to the bathroom and then is to be scared by bushes and whatever, what have you, because this is a horror film, and makes his way back onto finally just being like, okay, there's only a few number of people left. Give me my reading, finally. So we come to find that, of course, Paxton is to be the fool. And I was like, like, I get it that probably Paxton's character was probably set to be comic relief, but, like, really the whole fool thing was like, man, that is really just driving it home. And I even like how Paxton was trying to figure out a way to, like, better have an outcome with his tarot cards, unlike all the others, where they were just kind of going with the flow of whatever Haley was saying, where Paxton was like, well, yeah, but the Fool card, like, that means I'm going to be, like, a rich man, right? Or I'm going to come into some fortune, or, like, I'm going to become this big, lavish star compared to all these other people, right? I'm going to have a good ending to my story, right? And so, really, also the funny thing is, like, we come to find that every single one of these readings do play into how the characters are to possibly die, like word for word what Haley says. And then also, I'm like, man, Haley was really good at delivering all these things, because, man, if she would have messed up somewhere, like, they would have had to have changed the whole story of the film because of what Haley said in the beginning of this. So good job, Haley. Then also, pretty decent job at just delivering this movie, because Final Girl. But so we have Paxton, who's trying to kind of bargain with his card, and he's the only real one that does so. And then, of course, we have to go on into the next card after that, which I think is to be. Oh no, was this the? I'm trying to see if there was a fifth card, because I think I skipped a number. Guess what? I can't count figures, right? Or more than likely, I'm probably skipping a character. Next up, I think, is Lucas. Lucas goes on. We find out that he has the Hermit card. I'm like, I have never heard of this card before in my life as far as tarot. And weirdly enough, when eventually we get the Hermit character, he has this kind of lantern thing. I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting and kind of cool. I like how they deliver the actual tarot cards in this film as far as the monster side is concerned. But yeah, like, it's just like, there wasn't much creativity coming out of how every one of these people were to really die. So it honestly seems like for Lucas's card, the Hermit, it seems like his kind of tale was way more optimistic than anybody else. Because they really play into the fact that Hermit, like, oh, he could be finding some love. Which immediately he looked at his girl and he's like, like you, me, baby. Yeah. And also, it seems that Lucas was going to come up come into getting some fortune, which he ended up getting a scratch off by the gas station, and well, pow, $700. Good for him. So we after then Lucas and his like, oh man, like things could not be going better for you, but wait till you end up seeing who dies in this film. Yeah. Just wait till you see who dies in this film. So next batter up, we of course have Grant, and Grant is looking at Haley, and it's like, well, hey, like you better give me some really good cards because I'm your ex-boyfriend. But then there is also some questions there. There's also some linger there. There is also some like, why can't you just like give me good cards, Grant? Questioning. So we come to find that Grant's middle card is the devil. And everything that Haley used to go on and tell Grant is just be like, well, yeah, like you don't really listen and you don't this and you don't that. And Grant is relating everything to their relationship and not really seeing the cards as like, well, hey, this maybe should be something I'm working on. Because I really don't listen to the card reader. And so we then come to find that there has to be seemingly, I think there is one card reading left, and that is to have Haley read her own fortune. And we come to find that Haley, at the end of her roll, is to end up getting the death card. And again, Haley would have to go on and say, like, well, yeah, like, that death card. Like, yeah, it might say new beginnings, but also it might mean that I'm going to be getting the lurch. I'm going to be getting the death. I'm going to be saying goodbye to y'all really, really soon. But we come to find that that's not really the case in this film. So, firstly, we of course have the characters going on to realizing, like, okay, after this whole tarot reading thing, they decided, like, okay, like, we've drank enough, we've had a good enough time, let's kind of sleep on it, and hopefully we're not going to be dead by tomorrow, as if this is Final Destination. So we come to find that all these tarot cards are cursed. What a predicament that they are in. So we go on to have them, of course, sleep this off, thinking that no horrifying things are going to happen to them, and they would be, of course, surely wrong. And and of course, I'm going to my notes to try to figure out where is all I can start with this. Also, we oh, this is all in reverse. Uh, okay, we have our characters making their way back to their respective dorms because of course this whole fun time has been over with, and we of course have Ellis, who I believe is talking to one of the other girls about Haley and Grant's breaking up. Like, hey, did you hear? Yeah, like it's so sad. Oh wow, it really is. But for Eliza supposedly having like a birthday celebration it really feels like there's nobody to greet her upon this day. Like, hey, happy birthday! Hey, yeah! Like, it seems like Elise is to only have this group of friends and nobody else cares, even though there is a big, massive sign that says happy birthday for Elise. So, Elise is to come to find that she is to hear this banging upon this hallway, and it is to be of this attic ladder that is to have dropped upon this hallway. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm hoping that, like, we're gonna go somewhere with this. Maybe not drag it out too much, but they do. And so Elise goes on and puts the ladder up and closes the whole attic thing and then goes back to her room to eventually have the ladder bang again. And so Eliza's like, well, hey, is this some prank? Someone try to get me? Am I punked? Like, where is Ashton Kutcher? And so Elise, or Eliza, however you want to pronounce her name, because I know I'm going to butcher it anyways, we come to find that she's like, okay, like, there must be some kind of fun prank that these guys are pulling. I'm going to walk up this attic ladder and kind of see who's the prankster, who's the funny person, guy or girl. And we are to, of course, go on to have Elise see her high priestess card, and a bunch of candles are surrounding her. And I'm like, okay, where is the scare? And immediately once the girl puts the card down, the high priestess jumps out at her in front of her. And I'm like, of course, that's how it's going to go. Elise falls down the ladder. I'm like, oh my God. That is some brutal stuff. If anywhere, now I have to realize that falling down a flight of stairs or falling down a ladder has got to be the most brutal thing that you can do in a horror film whatsoever. Plus, doing anything with a ladder in a horror film is like, man, is that really bad. Because you're just kind of controlling your rung of the ladder, and all of a sudden, like, something could be there. And yeah, that could just be a really scary part of a movie. But so, we have Elise, who's now, like, on the ground. She's more dragging to her phone desperately. Like, I hope I can just call 911 and really not be able to have a way to have the cops do diddly squat about whatever is going to be happening to me, because this is all supernatural. So Eliza tries to desperately get to this phone, and we have the attic ladder that is to be rising and then falling upon Eliza, smashing her consistently. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is going to be the best kill part of this whole entire movie, because I did not go on to realize that seemingly most of the rest of the film was going to be like off-screen kills, with the exclusion of possibly one character. So, until I probably more and more talk about this film and then realize that I had made that mistake. But bear with me. So, we, of course, have Eliza die, and we have all the friends who are to, of course, get together and just be all sad and, like, depressed that Eliza had died and whatever have you. And so that, of course, leaves our characters to not have any, like, foul play or suspicions of this girl's death. And they, of course, mourn her loss, and then they go on to all separate. And that, of course, has us turn around and have another character, after really hugging and kissing and loving and other numerous kinds of things with this one Madeline girl, Lucas is to separate from after some clocking of time. Lucas then goes on to a subway, North Rail, whatever that kind of phrasing or whatever thing that you were to go on and go underground to get a subway. However you word that in the words of which that you live upon. Yeah. Lucas goes into a subway station, not a Subway, eat fresh. And Lucas is to have a kind of Darkness Falls movie kind of moment where all of a sudden all the lights are starting to blacken. And I'm like, all right, this is getting some exciting going on. I'm like, this is pretty sweet. So Lucas, it seems, is kind of running through the station trying to find the most lit area he could possibly find out of this entire subway and station. And it is to lead to some door that I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like it slaps the word exit on it. So, like, whatever door you're going to go into probably is not going to be the most safe location. And clearly it wasn't. Lucas goes on into this subway track where there's a number of tracks and there's a car that it seems has no people within it, and it's just kind of just sitting there for whatever reason, because maybe it's the end of its station day or whatever. I don't know subway terminology honestly, so we'll happens. So Lucas goes on to make his way through this darkened subway that is, or subway train thing that is to be empty. And he, of course, is to be consistently in front of or behind or side. Ghost is to appear and scare him. And immediately when we are to have this character on screen, I'm like, okay, well, obviously the scare is coming from here, and obviously the scare is coming from ahead of him, and obviously, because it's just where the camera is positioned. It's not a surprise. And they do that throughout a big chunk of this film, where it's like, well, obviously the scare is going to happen in front of the character, because that's where the camera is positioned. Kind of lazy in my thought process of seeing this film. So we have the hermit ghost that is to scare Lucas so bad that Lucas is to jump from out of the emptied subway to have him collide with a subway that, of course, is still operational and kills him. I'm like, all right, good enough. Good enough. Me explaining it, I guess, has to be forcefully good enough. I apologize for that, but man, that just has to be a good enough death, right? So we have, of course, right after that, like now, like that there is seemingly a string of murders with these friends. It's like, okay, like, well, now, like, the cops are really gonna have to get involved. And like, of course, the cops can't do anything because cliche-ish horror movie that you've ever seen in your life. And where are they going to figure out the connection of who could possibly have been the killer? And even the friends are even questioning whether it could be one of their own friends, like it's an inside job. And immediately they're like, hey, man, like, no. Like, we trust everybody good and well enough that, like, we don't think any one of us is really the killer. But they probably should have. So they get together, and so they're realizing, like, strength in numbers, like, we should really go on and figure out why that these deaths are happening. And so they come to this realization not only once but twice in this film, because like at first they're just like, well, like, it probably should maybe be because of the tarot card readings, right? And like Haley kind of backtracks what it was that she was to go on and say to either one of those people who had died. And she was like, wow, that does sound a lot like how they actually died. Because I was mentioning to Lucas how he was on like a certain track. And I mentioned to Eliza how she was going to she was gonna get a ladder of of this and that or whatever. And so the characters are like, well, yeah, it sounds about right. You're probably the killer. That's what they should have came to. But they're like, yeah, like it must be the cursed tarot cards. There's no other explanation that they have to come to twice. So they go on to Google to try to figure out the answers of this cursed tarot card reading thing, and that leads them to a woman, uh, ultimately named Alba Astron. And we would go on to find out that I guess Alma had gone on to be conflicted with this same problem of a tarot card reading that had went horribly awry, which I'm assuming if they're going to ever do a sequel to this movie, they're probably going to do a prequel, and it's probably going to be from that girl's perspective. And I would just be like, well, okay, like I don't really see rationally in my head how they can go on and do a sequel of said film and really make the death even much more fascinating than what was to be presented in this first movie. So they even go further to not only try to call this woman, because it seems that any website would also have a phone number of this girl, oddly enough. But then on top of that, we would come to find that they could figure out an address of this woman and also make their way to her home and just bang on the door and just be like, hey, we're cursed with tarot cards. Tell us your life story also and the history of this tarot card curse, because conveniently you know everything about it. Because if you've ever gone on and watched a horror movie thing in your life, there is always that much older generation person that knows the whole history of something for the audience to better understand why this film is to be what it is and whatever, what have you. I don't know why they have to always put that in every single horror movie, but also, like, I've seen so many cases of a horror film where they're like, oh yeah, I was the first one to have ever played so and so game, and I was the sole survivor, and so I'm looking at you, girl. You're probably going to be the next sole survivor. So yeah, so we have, of course, Alma here, who goes into the history of the cursed tarot cards and how they became to be, where we have this uh astrologist who goes on and is to deliver this tarot reading to this couple who are trying to have a baby. And every single time this astrologist, I believe is how it's pronounced because I kept thinking it was astronomer, this astrologist was to give this reading, it was to come up every single time that this one would die in childbirth. And of course, the father of this couple would not accept that answer. He was so frustrated to where he himself had to just go on and die via a cursed tarot card reading himself. That's how mad he was. That's how angry and upset he was. And so, and bizarrely, his tarot card reading was the Chained Hands, which I don't know exactly what tarot card that was because I didn't go and do that thorough in-depth research that I probably should have done, and I'm regretting now. But so, Chained Hands. Let me know in the comments below what tarot card that is if you watched past this point, and so on, and I thank you. So, and plus, also, a lot of people could also see that and just be like, oh yeah. Anyways, my bad. But yeah, so we go on to have our characters realize, the more and more that Alma is talking, it's like, well, hey, like, what do the tarot cards look like? Where did you go on and get these tarot cards? And I'm like, oh, so that's going to tell us that we're going to have to go all the way back to this location to specifically get these tarot cards because these are the only cursed tarot cards in town. So you got to go back to that one location that this whole movie started in, because full circle. And like at first our characters are against doing that. Some are running away from this whole situation, but it all leads back to that one cabin. So we have Alma that goes on to uh kind of say goodbye to our characters. And as they are to all going to the car, and some are possibly deciding, it's like, well, hey, like we have Paxton who's like, well, hey man, like I'm gonna go my separate ways and I'm just gonna wait this out. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like the greatest strategy in a horror movie. Yeah, I'm gonna separate from the entire group and I'm gonna go by myself. And how is it that every other character in this movie has already died? Being by themselves sounds like a sound strategy. Nice move, Paxton. Nice move. But yeah, but he is to stay with the group, and we have one character who is to want to go on and run away from said group, and we'll get to that here shortly. So we have all our characters and they're driving and they make their way to this bridge. And we all of a sudden have the car that just stops. I'm assuming it probably has lost gas or any number of reasons, clichéishly, that we have to say that this car just stopped perfectly at this moment. Maybe it was a electric car. I don't know. Convenient for story. But so we stop right at this bridge, and we have the one girl who was to be Madeline watching upon her phone the video of Haley talking about her reading because she was the only one that was smart enough to record the whole reading to really make the best out of this situation where she can try to figure out like on her phone like what Haley said to just like, okay, I need to not do this. But Madeline, of course, is to run away from her group. She is to completely get out of the car and start booking it. Haley is to try and chase after her because it's like Haley is desperately like trying to save her friend and realizing again in a horror movie, if you separate from a pack, you're probably going to die. So Madeline starts running, and we have the rest of the group that, of course, is in the car besides Haley that is running after her. The car starts to go off via its sensors. And we start to see on the car, it's like, oh my god, something's hitting the car from the front, the side, the back angle, the front angle, the swerve angle, the blind spot angle. Pow! We come to find that the hanged man is to smash onto the window and then is to go on and continue and get up and make its way to the Madeline of which that he is supposed to hang here, which of course is what happens. So I'm like, man, all of this is just like I'm knowing what's gonna happen, and it's slowly giving me that. And I'm a little bit frustrated at this point, knowing where this story is heading, because it's a cursed movie, and every single one of these people should die. Because I've seen so many of these kind of cursed bye man kind of movies, and when somebody's get cursed, you're effed. Like there is no way that you can avoid what is going to happen to you. But miraculous cases have happened, and franchises have happened after that said circumstance. But so of a person continuing coming back over and over and over again, even though rationally they should have been dead by at least the second movie, right? So, because why would you continue to pay that actor for coming back every time? Because you have to pay them more and more money. Moving on. So Madeline ends up getting hung and killed, and then so Haley's like, well, I guess since my friend is effed, like time to run back to the car and just book it and get the flock of seagulls out of here because we're gonna have to go on and uh, get killed by a number of our own cards. So we have our characters that, of course, decide that they desperately need uh, to separate at some point. And so, again, that is to be that Paige, Haley, and Grant decide that they are going to go back to the cabin, and Paxton is like, "No, I'm going to sit this out at my place. I'm going to chill out and have this just all blow over." And so, like, man, that is a really bad decision. Haven't you seen the script for the early parts of this movie? And Paxton was like, "No, like I was busy. I wasn't in those scenes. I read the whole script. I read it. Yeah, sure you did. Uh, man, if I were probably in a movie where uh, where like I didn't have a lot of like scenes and whatever, like I would be like, man, I should probably read the whole script, even though I'm probably not going to be in a good chunk of the film. But anyways, so Paxton, Paxton, I'm going to focus on right now, and we'll get back to the rest of the group because fun times will be had by them. So Paxton goes on to make his way to his place, and I'm like, here's probably the most interesting monsterish character that comes into fray. But then wait for the death. Wait for that death. What the fuck? So Paxton goes on to just kind of hear some jingle jangling, and Paxton ends up going from his door to then like, you know what, I heard a little something something. I'm gonna turn and look at this dude that is just twisting his body just kind of full circle, or probably just like to one side and then going back to the other, and like editing has been had that day. But hey, there is some weird double jointed, triple whatever jointed people that can do all kinds of stuff. But again, there has probably been some editing that was to have been had that day. Paxton looks at this person who is contorting himself in a bizarrish manner, and Paxton's like, you know what? I should probably wait till this guy comes closer to me and just like give him a little handshake, or something. Like, give him $20. Like, I'm sure he's probably not gonna kill me, right? Yeah, so Paxton's like, yeah, I'm weirded out by this dude. I'm gonna go in my place and not call the cops with my cell phone, even though he probably has one. So Paxton instead makes his way to his place and is to go on and see that there seems to be a bunch of papers that are to be upon this wall, even selling this movie to us, saying that Paxton is the fool, and uh, and also we had where when Lucas died, we had the newspaper that says you're gonna die today. I'm like, that was stupid. Like, you really just have to like really like shove it in our face movie that like this person is going to be the next in line. But I guess it's like the cool Easter eggs of those moments where we can just be like, oh, I observed that thing and it paid off. Because probably an often amount of large times, I am probably not that observant as I should be or there's certain times where I picked up on things that it's like miraculous. Probably not as often as I'd like. Maybe even in this review right now, where I'm taking too much time talking about this one film. Fourth wall break. So we have Paxton. He's making his way to this elevator. I'm like, dude, the elevator is how you're gonna die, buddy. I saw the movie The Devil. People go in an elevator, and the elevator just stops. Like, you're gonna die. So Paxton goes into this elevator, and he hits button number 5, and he's like, all right, I think I'm fine now. I think I'm safe, because I'm sure the jester or the fool-like clown character is not going to go on and be able to just appear at any level of any button that I'm going to hit, right? He can't be that quick. Look at any generic horror film, and you would say that a lot of those slasher characters walk really slow. So I should just be like, I'm on an elevator. I won. Not the case. Paxton goes on to just hit his 5 button, and when the door opens, we of course have the jester who is just in the darkened shadows, just twisting and contorting his body to all kinds of ways, of which that is to be really a waste of money and time, because you can barely see it. You can barely definitively eyeball it and realize that this character is doing said thing because it is in the darkness. I realize also that the way of which that this movie is to be put upon this app currently as the second recording is not the best quality, but still, even with that, you cannot tell right out of the gate that this jester is popping and locking and doing all of its good and creepy stuff. And so we have Paxton who's like, well, I'm just going to hit all the buttons. He shouldn't be in every single level, right? You have never seen a ghost movie in your life, have you, Paxton? No, you have not. Oh, man, I think there was another point that I wanted to be made through any of the other kind of deaths in this film, but I just digress. So Paxton is to just hit all the buttons and just kind of wait for something to happen for this elevator. And the jester or the fool just decides to just smash through the elevator and is to surprise Paxton and is to just be like, yeah, I'm coming to get you with my gruesome teeth. Cut away to the rest of the group to possibly have us think that Paxton had died off screen. Yeah. Died. Off screen. Sure. And then, so we have Paige, we have Grant, and we have Haley left. So they decide to make their way back to the cabin. Logically, that seems to be the way to figure out how to dissolve this whole curse and hopefully win this day. And so we have to realize that some thinning of the herd has to happen. And that, of course, has to happen when the group separates. Because you can't just have 3 people that stay together and all win victory and whatever have you. Somebody has to separate. So that, of course, has to, sadly enough, be Paige. Paige goes on and she is trying to find her friends, but then ends up getting separated with them. And then when she goes on to like go into this, I think, basement area place, and it's to think that everything's going to be copacetic, even though, again, she's by herself. She makes her way onto a basement-like location that is to push her on to a oddly crowded stage of sorts with an audience and a musician, not musician, magician, magician. Let's get that right. So I'm like, okay, like, here's where the movie is really gonna pick up. Here's where we're really gonna just, like, do something really fascinating here with this tarot card. And yeah, we get the girl who is like, oh, well, like, that audience looks pretty scary. That musician looks pretty scary. I'm just gonna back up a little bit then and just make my way into this box. This, 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 this box. And just think that the murderer or the murderer is not gonna find me in this one box, even though this is probably the only thing in this entire location that is probably the size of having to be available for me to hide in. Like, obviously, the magician is going to find me there, even though he's technically a ghost, and he should probably easily find you. Not knowing any better. So, when this girl was immediately going to be put in this box, I'm like, I immediately know what magician trick this guy is going to use to get to this girl, and funny enough, that's exactly where they go. I'm like, I'm seeing the saw coming through. I'm like, of course. I'm going to saw you in half because it's a magician trick. We see the saw coming from this way and coming from that way. She almost gets hurt. And then, bizarrely, the box just starts closing in on this girl to where she's laying now in this box. And we come to find that this magician is back upon the stage. And we see the audience, and he is to go on and saw this woman in half. And now we find Paige dead, assumingly. Because the death, there's no brutality to it. It's like the magician doesn't separate the person, and we see the absolute organs falling out or whatever. No. We just have to assume that she's dead. Because this movie is to be rated the way it is. That should have probably been the key thing of which that you should have brought up right away. I get it. So, we have Haley, we have Grant, who are both left. And for an update, Grant's card, of course, was to be the devil. And Haley's card was, of course, to be just death. Just straight up death. Just straight up, just straight up RIP. So, even though, like, Haley is supposed to be the final girl, the death card was just like, well, like, maybe Grant could possibly get out of his circumstance. He could make a deal. But Haley, probably not so much. But let's be hopeful. So, we have both Grant and we have both Haley. And both of them are just like, well, like, what are we gonna do at this point? Like, all of our friends have died, and we gotta mourn their loss again in this film, and realize that there may not be any hope for either one of us. And we have Haley who comes up with the observation that it's like, well, like, the astrologist, like, she never went on and she never got her reading of herself done. So, like, that must be the key factor of how we can just beat this curse. And I am just like, really? That's how you're just going to easily just get to that? And they try to make some, like, hoops for our characters to jump through, but the hoops aren't really that big, let's just say. So, we have Haley and we have Grant. And in the shadows, we, of course, have emerged a devilish character that grabs Grant and chucks him out this window to fall upon this roof to then have us maybe assume that he's going to die, but then also realize that he's going to come back because he still has to fully immerse himself in the devil card. And so, now that Grant is technically taken care of, We then have Haley that's like, well, like, you gotta see death. You gotta see the Grim Reaper. So the Grim Reaper comes in. I'm like, okay, like Grim Reaper is kind of looking like a little bit of a Slender Man kind of thing going on here with kind of very thin character, but like, you know what? I'm kind of into it. I'm kind of into how like creepy some of these characters might look. So we have Haley, of course, trying to run away from this death character, to then have us come to find that Grant is to rush back in with this fire poker and is to kind of attack this monster, but then also realize, like, dude, you're just going to be common fodder. You're just going to be a person that's just going to, like, be like the thing holding this monster back for this girl to take all the freaking time in the world to read this tarot card reading. And so we have Grant, who's just holding back this monster as best as he possibly can, to have Haley start to plop this reading out. Because the thing that I completely dodged the bullet about, which I have to go on and say here, because Alma had come back to this cabin location to have to go on and try and do a reading and try and talk with uh, the astrologist. And I don't know if I'm saying that right or not. And so Alma, at the early part of the movie, she goes on and she is to have all these like zodiac stones and is to really try to channel this woman to like to talk to her, and that just leads to having the astrologist slapping the card down of these six swords, and Alma is to be grabbed. And then when the three characters who are still alive at that point, early part of the movie, Alma is to have six swords in her back. And so we come to find that I think that tarot card is just to be called six, because really I think it's to be called like swords or six or whatever, but like there's actually a tarot card that is to be like that. It seems like tarot cards at some point have like the swords and the heart, depending on which number it is. Like they have all kinds of different swords going on uh, in different variations. There's like 10 swords, so on, so forth. I had to kind of definitively count out the swords and whatever. But anyways, moving on. Alma dies. The three left characters again. Uh, we have Paige, who went off to die with a magician. Grant, who is now hassling with the devil slash reaper, and then Haley is to go on and read this tarot card reading. And of course, when Haley is to talk with the ghost spirit character, that it's now kind of drastically changed her look, which looked really cool. Kind of very much kind of scribbles and scars and whichever upon this ghostly character's face. Haley is to slam down the death card on the astrologist and say it's like, okay, like, hey, your time has come. Like, you need to die. So you need to move on. You need to stop cursing people. And that, of course, has, of course, the effect of which it should have, which the ghost realizes it needs to cross over. We even had at one point where the three characters, again, in an early part of the movie, a little bit early part of the movie, they tried to burn the cards in the fire. And the cards, not at all, were burning. And I'm like, well, of course, because they're cursed objects. But again, stuff that I'm saying after the fact, my apologies. If you were to have watched this movie, you're to be like, hey man, that isn't to happen to wait of what I'm just saying whatever pops in my brain because I forgot about it. At least it's not way too early. Like I forgot the very first scene of whatever. No, it is what it is. I'm sorry. Plus, also, I'm really just trying to get this review done. So we come to find that both Haley and both Grant survive this whole circumstance, and they decide to make their way out of this cabin and walk. And at some point, they're going on and they're complaining, like, man, like, we're walking a long time already. Like, when does this movie end? Like, roll the credits. Come on. Like, I'm definitely not walking into the sunset with this film. And so we have our characters that are just kind of walking off, and we have this car coming into fray, and we have Grant that's kind of looking like, well, like, could we still be cursed? Like, the you said something about my devil card being this and that. And this car comes in, a person comes out of the car, and we come to find that it's Paxton. And we're just like, wait a minute. Like, this dude should be dead? Why is he on screen? Like, he should have died, like, a year ago. Not to mention, like, X number of minutes ago that this movie has just been, like, saying that Paxton is going to die because passing of time. And so we have Paxton that is going on and talking to both Haley and is talking to both Grant and Haley. And they have to rationalize now by the end of the movie how Paxton is still alive. They even have to do a whole, like, end credit shtick explaining his death or why he did not die. And I was like, well, hey, could this be some kind of alternate ending thing? And so we have Paxton who goes on and says that he was to have been in this elevator and had the monster coming closer and closer to him, but then the elevator door opened and a person talked to Paxton, like, hey, Paxton. And Paxton's like, hey, man. And that's how he escaped that whole endeavor. Someone else just magically showed up in the elevator and he was good. I hate. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. And there have been some pretty bad horror films. But that one moment there takes the freaking cake. But again, regardless of what I was to have gone on and said at any point in this review, of mistakes I might have said or made, that really irked the crap out of me. To really just justify an actor to go into sequel. And plus also, I feel like for this horror movie, they probably had to really say that, like, well, there's been so many horror movies where, like, one person has survived or two people has survived. Like, can't we just finally do a horror movie where three people survive by the end of it? Just to do something different. Yeah, but you would have to go on and equally have these characters have a good enough reason why they all survived. But anyways, let's move on and let's go into Abigail. Let me do some adjustment here. Uh, so Abigail, Abigail. Spoilers now. Spoiler time for Abigail. I've already been talking for an hour. I'm sorry, but I'm probably gonna be talking a good chunk about this film too, because there's a lot of stuff going on in it, and hopefully I can remember all the twists and turns and tails and twines. Starting off, so spoilers for this. Spoilers. We start off this film at a ballet concert, and we of course have Abigail, who's doing her sways and her swan lakes and her whatever the heck else is ballet. Nutcrackers! She's doing her nutcracker. I don't know what she's doing. She's just dancing by herself, ballet style. And I honestly think it's hilarious in the later part of the film where Frank is to go on and say, it's like, I hate ballet. And man, was there such a good cast in this movie. And I didn't want anybody to die, in all honesty. I didn't want anybody to die in this movie because I really liked the cast. Especially, I really liked Kevin Durand. I really didn't want him to die whatsoever. But the way that they kind of like were talking about his character, it's like, well, you're just the muscle guy. You're just the the muscly dude who is the athlete. And I'm like they're building him up as the jock guy. And in every single horror movie, do we ever really see the jock guy win in the end and make it all the way through? Very scarcely. But so, anyways, we have this ballet concert going on, and we are to have both Sammy and both Dean, who are to go on and be at this car. And Dean is consistently trying to get in Sammy's pants, obviously. One way or the other. He's just like, hey girl, like, what's your name? Like, what's your phone number? Let me get your digits. And Sammy is consistently trying to be like, hey man, like, no names, no nothing. Like, we can't. Like, hey, we have to just be in a haunted mansion for 24 hours. Like maybe we're gonna have to forcibly like have some kind of partnership, but not that kind of partnership. If anything, it seems that Sammy was a lot more closer with Peter, which I was like, all right, like okay, like I kind of wanted those characters once they were kind of getting cozy together when they were drinking. Like I was like, okay, I like that they kind of partnered them two together, and they kind of partnered um, both Joy and Rickles together. Like I liked like how that was set up. Like I thought that was kind of done together well. And Frank and Peter kind of working together was moving on. Sorry. So we have this ballet concert being done and over with, and we come to find that the car is to have a tracker put upon it. And so we should have assumed that the way in which that they were going to take said girl was going to be at the concert. But no, they just wait for the character to make their way home, and right before she gets into her room, that's when the goons make their way to this girl's room to just kind of surprise her when she is to be upon her bed, ending her phone call with her mom. So we have, of course, Joey and Frank having this problem with one another right out of the gate. Whereas, like, Frank is, like, trying to come in there and he's coming in there hard. And Joey is to even, like, try to, like, hold back Frank and just be like, no, like, don't hit this girl. Like, we're, of course, going to treat this girl as best uh, and as nice as we can, because Joey, of course, is to have her own kid that she is to uh, be kind of looking on her phone at, because, of course, she cannot have a real uh, parenting relationship with her kid. And in the later parts of which we go with this film, we'll find out why. So we have Joey who goes on to drug Abigail instead of going on and like knocking her out or any violent means. And we have Peter who kind of slings this girl over his shoulder. I'm like, yeah, God, man, like Kevin should go on and seriously be like Arnold Schwarzenegger Commando, where he's like holding the tree log and he's just like walking around the woods with it. Cause man, like Kevin always in movies is presented to be either the villain or just such a cool character every single movie. Or a film where I'm like, man, like when he does the blob in the Wolverine movie, oh my god, like that should have been a whole nother film with him being the blob, but it never happened. Ugh. Uh and also the guy who plays Frank in this movie should have done a bunch of stuff with the Legion character, but that never happened. Anyways, moving on. I just want to see success with all these actors. I really do, except for the one that passed away sadly. And he was also on Euphoria. Anyways, we have the characters putting Abigail in this van conveniently right as the parents were to make their way home and were to sound off all these alarms. And conveniently, like, we had Rickles who was having this rifle, and he's like, well, hey, am I going to have to pop somebody? And, like, the people are coming in like 9 minutes, and Frank is like, well, I'll be out in 8. They get out just in time to cleverly be able to get this girl in this van. They start to drive off, and we, of course, still have Joey, who's trying as best as possible to take care of this girl, blindfold her, and just kind of make sure that she's taken care of. So we have Dean who's going on and questioning Sammy about like, hey, give me your name, tell me. And Frank is like, shut up, like we don't give names, like we don't know who any of us are, like we're just these mystery men who just kind of do these things to get paid, and then we book it. So Dean, of course, is the wheelman, and he is to have gone on and made a certain turn. And Sammy's like, well, hey, like, did you not listen to what I said? Like, I was GPSing us to get to this direction. Dean is like, oh, no, like, I went this way on purpose because of this truck, and this truck is hiding this camera. So like, Dean continues on after a good amount of time has passed, and we come to find that like Dean is to be this like great wheelman, but in all honesty, I really don't want to speak ill of the dead, but Dean's character is really not that good. I hate to say that, but it's because it's speaking ill of the dead. Like, Dean tries to make the most of his character, but they really don't give anything to this character. It's like, oh, he's still a very mysterious wheelman guy. He's a psychopath. But they do nothing with the psychopath part. Like, they really did nothing with him. And that's freaking sad. So, we get to this location, this seemingly huge, massive place, this castle-esque like place, and we meet up with, of course, a man named Lampert, who I'm like, oh my god, Lampert! Know him from Breaking Bad and all kinds of other stuff. He's doing a new show, it seems. I'm like, man, this guy is just consistently just banging out and just doing a bunch of content. And heaven forbid, I'm even probably able to pronounce the actor's real name because it's a very long stretch one. But the guy who plays Lampert, good stuff. Uh, Esposito, probably butchered that. My bad. Uh, Giancarlo, I don't know. Lampert, my bad. So we have Lampert that goes on to intro our characters into this hideout and is to tell them, like, okay, you guys have 24 hours to hold this girl and like do whatever you want until that time, and we're only going to have one person come in to see this girl because I only want to have her know about one voice and one voice alone. And all the characters are starting to now realize is like, well, hey, we know nothing about one another. Like how about you tell us who we all are? And Lampert is like, no, like that's not the whole point of this. It's like, but we have to like spend a whole 24 hours together in one location forcibly, and like, and we don't know who anybody is. Like we don't know if we're gonna get freaking like shivved in the night. And so Lampert is like, oh, okay. Like, how about just so everybody seems to somewhat know who they can call everyone, I'm just going to give you all code names. And so we go down the line, and of course, we have Lampert who calls the one girl Joey and ends up calling the one girl Frank and the one guy Peter and the one other guy Don Rickles. And uh, we of course have the blonde girl who's to be Sammy, and so on and so forth. Just naming everybody down the line. Uh, the one guy is the wheelman is to be called Dean, of course. And so we have Lampert that's like, okay, all right, like good enough. I'm out of here. So we would probably have to assume that this entire place is where it's going to get locked down and all the cages and all these things are going to come up, but like that doesn't happen till much later in the film, to where it seems our characters are realizing something's up, and then by then they of course cannot escape because they think at some points that they probably can escape, but then by the first sign of real danger, lockdown happens. Because of course it does. Because cliche-ish horror film. So we have our characters getting together in one room, and like these characters just desperately want to know something about one another, even though they really should not at all. And so we have Joey that is to start breaking balls of all these characters and is to just say like, well, hey, $100, like I can tell you something about you that you're going to probably be surprised about, because you're giving me $100 to think that I'm not going to think of who you are. And so we have Frank that's like, okay, I'll go first. My $100 right here. And so Joey goes on. It's like, oh, well, you're a cop. It's like, I can tell by how you dress. I can tell about how you move, like what kind of guns that you have, and like I can tell like what kind of procedures that you're doing is just like a cop. And like, whoo, like man, she just got you. And like Frank is just like, okay, fair enough. And so Joey starts going down the line. It just starts breaking everybody. So we have Joey who goes on to, let's say, Peter, and it's like, well, yeah, like you, it's like you're obviously just the muscle, and like you've been born to bred to be that, and probably had some like problems with your dad, and is to just make your way in life because of your brute strength. And we of course has like Peter who's like, well, you got me there. Because Dean tries to go on and he tries to break down who all these characters were and he fails at it, so Joey has to make the turn and perfectly nail everybody. And so we have Joey who then goes after Sammy, the blonde girl, and it's to just be like, well, yeah, like you've made your way out of hacking through everything, and uh, and actually, like you're only gonna give me $20 to uh, guess who you are, but I'm sure you have much more money than that. I'm sure you're rich beyond the wildest dreams and whatever. And Sammy's like, well, so Joey then goes on to Rickles, and Rickles is like, dude, I'm not going to give you a cent. Like, you're going to get a whole $0 from me. And Joey's like, well, okay, like, I'll leave your secret identity up to you, but I'll just say the words Semper Fi. And it's like, oh, military guy, ooh. And come to find out, yeah, like with the way that he moves and the way that he is to do what he does, even down to the clothes that he wears, I'm like, military, obviously. Uh, but really, with how much a length of time that this guy has in this film, uh, wasted, wasted. So we have all our characters, and they start to all kind of separate, and they start to do their own thing. Most of them are drinking well beyond what they should probably be drinking, realizing that they're going to be having a really long night ahead of them. Because horror movie, we have both Sam and we have Peter who's doing this quarter drinking game, and Peter just wants to drink to oblivion against Sammy. So he's messing up his quarters, even though he can nail doing quarters. For me, as far as quarters has gone, anytime I was to have attempted that, pretty bad myself. Uh, I but then again, I haven't had enough practice at it. But then also, like, I would have to figure out a way of how I can kind of do the bouncing and how that would work. And yeah, not really all that good on it, but because it'll take me a while, and then I might get it. But practice wasn't my strong suit with that. So we have Dean who kind of goes off and he's more of like the stoner character, and he is to be kind of more like holding a bong or trying to get high in some other means. And we also have to realize that our characters are to also figure out that Joey is a junkie. She is to consistently be popping some kind of candy in her mouth. And we even have Frank who's kind of like, well, hey, should we be concerned about you? Like should we like be thinking that if you're not going to get your fix, you're going to be flipping out, going through withdrawals or something? So like everybody kind of knows like where everybody's at, and so that's what I kind of like about this film, is to give us kind of character uh background without us consistently, or let me back up. So with them, of course, not supposed to know anything about anybody, like we're still needing to like give this backstory regardless. Like I like that, even though like a lot of these people should be like, I don't give a flying f who any of these people are. Like I just want my payday. No, we're just like, I need to know because story purposes. So moving on. So Joey goes on to look after the girl, as Rickles is to go on and set up his rifle and is to just kind of like be chilling in his own room for a good while. And so we have Joey who goes on to uh, put her mask on and is to unblindfold the girl. And the girl goes on to then wake up, and Joey and Abigail start having this conversation. And so Abigail, it seems, is trying to poke Joey for information about herself. It's like, well, hey, we shouldn't be giving you any information at all. But Abigail keeps prodding. It's like, well, hey, like, just tell me something about yourself. And Joey's like, well, I have a son. It's like, oh, so what is his name? And Joey's like, well, I'm not going to give that. And so Abigail's like, well, let's just say his name is Justin. And Abigail starts poking and asking Joey, like, well, what does Justin like? And the more and more that Abigail starts asking these questions, is like, why does Abigail care about any of this? Like, is this something that Abigail is going to use against her in the future? Because villain, but still, and that actually does come to pass. Like, everything that Abigail does talk to these people about, like, she twists and turns it later on, and like, man, that was so cool. Like, I knew that was gonna happen. I know, like, I'm like, she's really gonna use that one thing that that one guy says against her, and sure enough, yeah, because they have very limited transactions with one another. So Joey goes on to talk to Abigail, and Abigail's like, well, yeah, like, my dad, like, he really does not care about me, and I don't know how much money you're really gonna get out of me or anything. Like, so, like, you guys are just, this is gonna be a fruitless endeavor. Like, you guys just might as well just, like, my dad doesn't give a about me. And so, bizarrely, like, Joey takes that conversation, and Joey assumes via hearing that is like, oh, well, her dad is like an uber violent guy. Which I don't know where that comes from in that conversation. I guess, like, since Joey's like this profiler, like, I don't know where that line came from that the dad is a violent guy. But so Joey goes after talking to this girl immediately to Frank, and it's like, hey, like, do you know anything about this girl's dad? And Frank is like, no, of course I don't know anything about it. And Joey's like, well, hey, like, from the way I was having a little chat with this girl, like, it sounds like this guy is a, whoever this father of this girl is, like, it sounds like he's a bad dude. He's a bad hombre. So Frank, of course, because every one of these freaking people become the nosiest people of this entire film. They can't just let something go. They can't. It's impossible. So Frank is like, well, you know what? I'm going to want to find out who this dad is. And so Frank goes out of his way to go into Abigail's room, not knowing that Abigail is this thing called blindfolded, because she's not. And immediately when Frank comes into the room, Abigail is up on the bed, eyes looking at Frank, and Frank is like, oh my god, I need to cover up. I need to vampire myself. And so Frank is like, well, hey, turn around. Come on. So Frank is going on, bringing a gun to this girl's head. It's like, who is your daddy? And what are my eye color? What are my eyes color? What are they? And so Abigail's like, I don't know, I only saw you for a brief second. I didn't see anything. I don't know. And immediately when he was talking about eye color, I'm like, how is she going to use that against him later on? Because that's what I was thinking in my brain. Come to find out, what are my eye colors, Frank? So Frank goes on to just gun in head to just be like, well, hey, like, who's your daddy and what does he do? So Abigail goes on to say that this guy's name is Christoph Lazaro, or Lazar. And Frank is freaking out because of this name, because he knows how, like, big mob, bad final boss guy this Christoph Lazar is. And so he is just peeing himself with fear. I'm sure. You could probably see the pee at some point in the movie. Probably not, but, like, because of all the blood. Maybe there was some pee there. I don't know. Maybe, like, with how they had to do this whole filming schedule, maybe at some point an actor probably does pee themselves. Because who knows? Uh, especially if, like, hey, you're going to shoot me, like, chest high, right? Like, is it okay if I just pee right now? Because I really have to go. And moving on. So, after going on and talking to this girl, Frank runs off into this room. He, of course, closes the door because rationally he's thinking that, like, this kid is handcuffed to this bed and there is no way in heck that Abigail is just going to get out of those cuffs, right? There's no way. So Frank goes on and he's berserk. He's just like, I'm out of here. Like, you guys can have my share. I don't want any piece of this. I just heard that the boogeyman is possibly going to come after me, and it's not the girl named Abigail, because Abigail had gone on to threaten Joey and just be like, yeah, I'm sorry about what's all going to happen tonight, because you're such a nice person, but I'm going to murder and kill you. And probably right in front of all of your friends. It'll be fun. Deuces. So we have Frank again bolting out of the room. He's like, no, I don't want any of this. Like, you can take my money. Like, I don't want anything to do with this Christoph guy. No. And so, like, what's up with the Christoph guy? And he's like, that is some kind of level of scare. And so they start giving the Christoph character much more and more of a backstory, that he is to have this other Valdez character who is to, like, tear and rip people apart limb from limb and this and that. There's a whole huge buildup of how scary Christoph and his people are. And so it's like, yeah, like, hey man, like, should we do this job or not? Like, should we just turn this girl in to this family and just book it, like, and risk the rest of our lives just being on the run from this dude who's gonna boogeyman come and get us at some point? Because it's gonna happen. Excuse me, because that's how I felt like it was going to happen. Like, everyone was going to die at the end of this scenario, because of course I am not thinking of a horror situation. I'm really just thinking of a action movie where it's possible that everyone can die. It's possible. But so the characters all decide together. It's like, no. Like, we realize even more so now how scary and spooky that this whole thing could turn out to be, that even Lambert could be the guy who's gonna just roll us over. But we're still just gonna stay in this place and just sweat it out, to the point of even now, our characters, instead of deciding to just, like, well, okay, like, let's drink up some coffee and let's be alert. No, more so our characters are even going to be so much more scared that they're like, man, I'm give me the first alcoholic beverage I see, because I'm going to be swigging it down, and I'm just going to be getting as high as I possibly can, because this might be my last chance ever. I'm like, dude, this is when you should be at, like, DEF CON 1. You should be having the red alerts be popping up, flashing. Like, you should be, like, as awake as you could humanly possibly be. in a review that is probably already an hour and 45 minutes. What a mistake that was. But here's where we are. So, I can't stop trying to make that joke, but I'm going to continue on anyways. I'm not that funny. I'm not. Anyways, I'll even admit it. So, our characters are just like, okay, we're really in a bad situation, and so like people are resorting to coping means, and so Joey is to go on and is to be making her way to the rifleman's room because it seems like he's the only level-headed guy out of all of this. And Joey's looking at Wriggles. It's like, I want me some of that. Like, there is such like a close like thing of like, man, they should just lock lips. Like they should just kiss here. Like I don't know why it is that the two of them are just so like close to one another, but yet like nothing is really happening, but it's like a forced situation where it looks like something is going to happen. And so Joey and Wriggles think that if anything goes down that they can trust one another. And Sammy is to go on and make her way to her room and is to be surprised by Dean while Sammy is going on and watching cartoons, and Dean is just like, "Hey, yeah, like, I thought we were vibing. Like, I thought something was gonna go on. So, like, I'm gonna scare the crap out of you, and then I'm gonna go on and leave this room and probably die after that. Is that okay?" And Sammy's like, "Okay." So we have Dean, and he leaves the room, and he goes in this separate area. He's kind of looking at the fridge, looking at kind of the lean beef or something. He's doing something. I don't know what he is, but he's just sitting in this one location, and he is to go and hear noise, and he's like, "What's that? I need to go on and do the cliche-ish horror thing and check what that is. I need to go. I'm probably gonna die though." So Dean goes on, and he is to be by these steps, and monsterish thing comes at him, and he is trying to grab these steps to just like, "Oh no, like it's dragging me, help, somebody help me." And I'm like, "Dean, like you're gonna die, buddy. Like you're by yourself, you're gonna die." Classic horror situation. And so Dean is screaming help, and so Sammy is the only one that gives a rip and has heard Dean's cries. So Sammy is to go on and make her way to the area of which that Dean is to be located at, which is to be by this table. It looks like some kind of weird looking kitchen. And so Sammy is thinking like, "Oh, Dean, you're pranking me again, aren't you? Where is Ashton Kutcher gonna pop out and punk me?" Why am I referencing the Ashton Kutcher movie or the Ashton Kutcher show Punked? That was so long ago, but I'm thinking that that's the only candid camera show that exists out there that I can still reference, except for Candid Camera. Anyways, so Sammy goes on and is to slap the head of Dean because she's upset because she assumed that she was pranked yet again, to have Dean's head just fall, giving us some gruesome neck work. And I'm like, oh my god. Like, not only is this pretty gruesome, but then again, like, we're having Sammy like scream for Peter to come in, and he has some gruesomeness upon his face because Peter had gone on and gotten so drunk, blackout drunk, that Dean had decided to draw a wang thing upon that face of Peter. And I'm like, you have disgraced that man's face. How dare you? How dare you? He has a dare on his face. So Peter comes on and he's like, what? Like, I just woke up. I was freaking tired. Because all that slamming drinking that we were doing together. Why is it that you are so wide awake right now, screaming and hollering for somebody dead? But I am just so like, oh. So Peter comes in. He's like, what the heck is going on? Why is this guy's head off of his body? What? I was just chilling. And Sammy was telling Peter, it's like, hey, like, you need to go on and you need to find all the rest of the people to point out that this guy is dead. And so Peter's like, okay, fine. Like, we really should be separating right now. And you end up dead. This sounds intelligent. But Peter goes on to find all the other people and make their way back to this one location to then have Sammy need to explain to the rest of the group. It's like, well, yeah, like, I heard screaming and yelling from Dean. I thought it was a joke, but then when I came in here, I found dead body. So what should we do now? And so that's where they come up with the whole Valdez story. And they're like, okay, well, like, there had been a person that would just kind of rip body parts and and be dropping organs out of people's bodies. And so, like, yeah, like, that has to just be this case. This has to be. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you think about it, like, a vampire can go on and bite somebody. But then there is the possibility that that bitten person could ultimately become a vampire. So the vampire, of course, would have to go on and, like, really just rip off a person's head or stake through the heart to make sure that all these people are to be dead. I would assume if a vampire goes and takes a heart out of a person's body, I'm assuming that person won't become a vampire, but there is also certain cases where that is still to become a case where a limited time vampire had lost their heart and still became a vampire. Yeah, there's a whole variety of different kind of vampire stories that have been out there, especially if you've watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They go through all kinds of things. They do all kinds of things with them vampires. They try to cure them. They try to do everything with them. They try to make them human again, or they try to give back their souls or take away their souls. It's a whole ordeal. It's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you haven't heard of that show or the Angel show that I actually did like, but anyways, I say because those early seasons were really slow, but then when we got to, like, the bigger kind of business aspect of the whole supernatural angle, and we get Spike into the Angel show. Why am I going on and talking about something besides this movie? I apologize. So, probably because I have forgotten exactly where to go further with this. My apologies. So, going right back to the Valdez thing. So, our characters are just kind of on pins and needles to just be like, okay, like, we obviously have somebody here that is going to kill us. Who could this be? They're even possibly throwing out all kinds of scenarios that it's like, well, what if Lambert is Valdez? What if Valdez is here and he has, like, found Lambert and had kind of squeezed him for information, and now he's arrived here and he's gonna kill all of us. Like, oh my god, like, they're rattling off every single scenario that could possibly be the case of how this person is now dead amongst them. And we then have Joey, who's like, well, how about I just go on and I just do this? How about I just go on and I speak with Abigail and I ask her if Valdez is here? The one person that you should probably not be asking this information, because of course she's going to be swerving around this story, because we come to find that Abigail is chess moving everybody. And I am so enjoying that. Of course, Abigail is going to be like just chess moving all these people and knows exactly where to get them all to kill one another off, because Abigail has been doing this for centuries. Because vampire. And the most unlikely person to be a vampire is a young girl. Unless you were to have gone on and seen Interview with a Vampire movie, where you saw Kirsten Dunst, who becomes a vampire in that film, who is a little girl. Moving on. So, Joey talks to Abigail, and Abigail says, it's like, well, yeah, Frank, the guy with the glasses, he told me he was Valdez, and he's working with my father. And in all honesty, like, in some ways or another, that is technically true. It seems that every single one of these people are working technically for, like, had technically worked side by side with a Valdez person, or an Abigail's family, uh, Kristoff's person, and they didn't even know. But anyways, so we have Joey, who's like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to believe this story of Abigail because we pinky sweared on this, because I pinky sweared earlier that I'll make sure that she is protected and safe and whatever by the end of this movie. Even though she's going to kill me multiple times, we still just did that whole pinky thing. So Joey then is to go in on the rest of the group, and it's like, okay, where is Frank? Like, all the rest of you guys are here looking at me now. Where is Frank? Because Joey started talking to Rickles, and Rickles walked away and died. So Joey's like, the one person that I relied on just stood there, and I was like, Rickles? Rickles? And he fell to the ground because, like, the man was torn. It's torn to pieces. And so Joey now rushes in. It's like, where is Frank? And Frank is in the bathroom taking a dump. And so Joey ends up pulling a gun on Frank. It's like, well, hey, you're Valdez. The girl told me you were Valdez. You told her that you were Valdez. And Frank is like, really? You're going to fall for that? Like, you were the most gullible out of all of us, and probably not all of us have the greatest IQ points in this whole entire room. But hey, you were the most gullible one. You're just falling hook, line, and sinker with this little girl. Because she's pinky swearing and having tea sessions and all kinds of things. Next, both Joey and Abigail are going to be are playing a round of poker together. They're going to be the best of friends, especially by the end of this movie, like right around the end. So Joey ends up pulling a gun on Frank, and Frank ends up looking at Peter. It's like, hey, Peter, don't do anything. And then Joey like looks at Peter, and Frank is like, ha ha ha, I got a gun on you now. What a slick move. Man, if any other movie could have ever tried that, God, that was smart. That was so clever. So Peter is looking at Joey, and Peter is like, you know what, I don't like Peter really has a really deep voice here. So I have to make an imitation of him, but it's not going to sound anywhere like him. It's probably going to sound more like Arnold Schwarzenegger, in all honesty. But Peter's like, you know, I don't want to like I'm gonna have to be rough with you, Joey. Like if you just won't give up your gun, like just come on. So Joey ends up having to be forced into now like okay, like well, if I'm gonna get kind of if I'm gonna get into a scenario where I'm gonna be backed into a corner, like we may as well just like have us all go back into Abigail's room to where she's gonna make the big huge reveal. Cause yeah, Joey rushes back into the one room with Abigail, hoping to just kind of like ward off. Then we come to have all the rest of the group make their way into Abigail's room, and that of course is finally when Abigail is to break her wrists and hands, because you gotta like thumbs and all that, you gotta break all that off, and she just uncuffs herself and then jumps onto Peter, and then Peter's like, oh my god, ah! And that's the big reveal that Abigail is now a big giant massive monster. And I'm like, god, that is so the worst. And so now, since we have all of our characters who have now gotten away from this girl, had locked the door behind them, and are now regrouping because they're like, what the was that? Some kind of demon? So they all turn to realize they're like, well, hey, like, maybe that girl was Valdez. It's the only thing that makes sense. There's no one else that seems to be here, but we'll find out that, like, later on, Lampert is just hiding in the shadows in the camera room later, just going like, yeah, like, I'm gonna just be editing this movie while everybody else is just on a coffee break. I'm gonna be really mixing this movie together. I have nothing better to do. So the group is just like, well, like obviously, like this girl is a vampire and also possibly Valdez. She's gonna be tearing and ripping people apart like nobody's business. So what are we gonna do now? Since like, but they don't even know that she's 100% a vampire. Because normal vampires just have the 2 teeth. She has like 50. That could be anything. That could be demon. That could be like look at the movie Legion. Like Legion, like the one old lady that comes into the diner, she has all this shark teeth. And of course, Kevin was also in the movie Legion. Kevin Durant. He was the angel guy. Gabriel? I don't know which name it was, but he was one of the angels. That movie is actually pretty sweet. But yeah, so cueing it back to Legion. But yeah, so we have our characters that have to go on and play dumb about vampires. How many vampire movies have there been in existence, and they have to figure out what a vampire is and then how to possibly kill a vampire, as if no one has ever seen a vampire movie in their life? Because immediately when you have gone on and seen the trailer of this movie, you're like, oh, that girl's a vampire. It can't be anything else but that. But then the movie also doesn't even play around with that too. That it could be anything else but a vampire. Nicolas Cage rolling in his non-grave whenever he was to have gone on and done that vampire movie. Vampire's Kiss. I think that's what it was called. So, because he wasn't a vampire, he was just a crazy loon. But anyways, I'm going on so many tangents. My apologies. I'm not doing it on purpose. It's just me. So they go on and they figure out like, okay, like, well, obviously, like crosses can hurt this thing, garlic can hurt this thing, and nobody comes to the conclusion of holy water because how can they even get anything like that? And they're like, well, hey, wooden stakes. What about silver? Did you guys try silver? No, that could have been the one thing. Silver or silver bullets, but how can they come up with that either? Man, if it would have been silver bullets, these guys would have been effed. Like, well, hey, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Lone Ranger. I have silver bullets in all of my guns. But so, anyways, we have our characters that Frank is like, well, like we have those pool cues, like let's sharpen those bad boys up, and hilariously, Peter is consistently just touching on the sharp part of this pool cue, and he ends up getting a splinter, and he's just like, oh my god, I have a splinter, it's a really bad one. I'm like, Peter, you're nailing this movie. You're giving me some good comedy here. I'm enjoying it. Uh, like, especially when Peter is to be just like face to face with Abigail, and he's like, yeah, I closed that door on her. Yeah, I got her. And Abigail just busts through the door, and he's just like, well, fuck. Well, all right. Like, that was like, oh my god, that was some good stuff. That was amazing. Some good comedy there. But yeah, so how they were kind of sneaking in some laughs was actually just amazing for this film. But so they go on and they're like, okay, like let's start like maneuvering around this place and let's go after this girl because we have to kill her. So they all separate. Stupid move, but really they don't know anything at all about how strong this girl is. They have no clue, like, if any of this stuff is really going to work. Does crosses work? Does garlic work? Or onions? In Sammy's case, it seems, because she doesn't know the difference. And how would I even know the difference? Because Sammy goes on and she's supposed to get garlic in the kitchen, and she comes back with onions, and Frank is just like, onions, Sammy? And then he kind of just walks off and he's just like, onions? And then he walks off more. And it's like, all right, like that, again, comedy. It was good. So it's like, onions. What if they would have just had that like 30 minutes later and Frank is still just on that one thing? He just can't let it go. So they all separate, and heaven forbid, they all just victoriously just wipe out this Abigail girl right out of the gate because it would end the film quickly and then give us to a final boss situation where we're like, oh, well, Abigail wasn't like the whole part of the movie. It's really about this guy, Christoph, his story. But I digress. So they're making their way through this place, and Abigail just wipes the floor with every single one of these characters. We also come to find that Joey is to realize that drugs, a needle, is to knock out Abigail because her pulse was slowing, and it seems like she was unconscious when they drugged her earlier before. So it's like, okay, that seemed to work. So drug the girl up. Why didn't they go and look into Dean's uh, stuff and see like how much weed did he have, how much like other drugs did he have, and see if there was any like real like consistent drugs that knock out this girl for good, at least for a week. So we have our characters. They all one by one. We of course have Sammy and Peter and Frank that are to mostly go round for round against this girl. And We of course have Peter. I already talked about him slamming the door and then bashing through the door. Frank goes on and tries to like pool stick this girl, and he gets a pool stick in his leg for his troubles. Sammy goes on and eventually tries to like duke it out uh with Abigail and tries to help out Peter, and Abigail ends up getting bitten in the arm for her troubles, and so Sammy's like, "Oh my god, am I going to turn into a vampire?" It's like, well, obviously, Catherine Newton, haven't you been in enough like supernatural things or a number of other shows and horror movies and whatever? Shouldn't you know all of this down like pat? Yeah, she was also in the Quantum Mania and whatever, and all those science movies and blah, blah, blah. She's been in a lot of stuff, but shouldn't she have the supernatural thing down pat? Because Supernatural show, I think, is what she was also in. But she doesn't know if she's going to become a vampire or not. It's like, well, maybe you're probably going to become one. So, which actually, the way that they present that in the film was actually really good. I really liked it. Because they kind of question it. They kind of, yeah, really good, really well put together. Anyways, moving on. So we have Peter. He's holding Abigail down, and he's like, "Joey, you better get that drug." Like he should have gave her like a countdown. I'm like, if you don't get that drug in like 10 seconds, like I'm freaking like I'm getting tired. I'm hungover. I drank too much earlier. That was a mistake. Also, like that whole me falling down that stairs though. And then also like Frank looking down at me like, "Oh my god, he fell." Yeah, that freaking hurt. So I'm not going to be able to hold this girl down. It's going to be tough. So Joey is able to get the drug in between this little caged area and drug up Abigail. We even get it at one point where, like, how this whole thing started is, uh, is Abigail was choking on Frank, and that's where we get the whole like, "What eye color are my eyes, Frank?" And Sammy grabs Abigail off of Frank, and then Abigail bites Sammy's arm. Peter grabs Abigail and is now tossing and turning with her. That sounded weird, but like fighting and wrestling, that sounded questionably better. And then so that's when, of course, we have Peter who is now on pushed, like forcing this girl down so that way drug, and so drug of horrible choices and of words. And so the girl's down, she's out for the count, and so really we're not having our characters that are coming up with a like completely sound thing of like what they should do next. Like really, if this girl is going to be out for like an hour or two, like they should have had like this grandmaster plan after what they were going to try to do, to then be like, okay, this is how we escape. Nothing really comes to mind clearly, but we have our characters who just decide after Abigail is out, they chuck her into this old elevator shaft like thing. And immediately when I saw Abigail in this elevator shaft, the first thing that came to mind was like, oh man, like didn't they do something in the last Scream movie that dealt with like an elevator, an old fashioned elevator cage thing that's just like this? Even kind of harpening back onto the Scream movie. Because the people that did Scream also did this, technically. So they're all possibly thinking it's like, well, can we just leave her in there until until we can figure out a way to escape? And of course, that's not how this all plays out. We have, of course, again, everyone turning on everyone because we, of course, have Abigail that tells everybody when she wakes up, it's like, well, hey, I'm going to make an offer to one of you that I will keep you alive and kill everyone else off if you left if you right now let me go free. And Peter's like, that sounds like a really good offer. And I'm like, Peter, she's gonna kill everybody. If you let her go, death will be fallen upon everyone. Even you. Because Abigail is to go on and tell all these people who they really are and how they all connect with Kristoff, to go on and have Frank to have killed a bunch of lieutenants that are to have worked with Kristoff, and Joey is to have gone on and been a medic that had kind of done this kind of shady after hours business, that Joey had gone on to kill one of Kristoff's working employees, and it seems that Peter is to have gone on and been a kind of loan shark or kind of muscle to some organization that is to have had some connection with Abigail's. I don't remember which one that one was. But Sammy was to have also gone on and hacked through some people to get some money from them, and of course that ties into Kristoff. And Rickles is dead, so who cares about that? Sadly enough, and also Dean had some connections, I'm sure. Everyone had a connection. But so Abigail's putting out there, hey, anybody let me free, like, I'll give you a get out of jail free card. And Peter is almost taking that offer. He's like, you know what, I'm tempted. I want to open this cage up. And Joey has to shoot Peter in the chest. And I'm like, why not just shoot him in the leg? Shoot him in the foot or something. Some place where he's probably not going to either bleed to death or possibly lose an organ. Shoot him in the hand. Do something that seems less like he's going to probably bleed out right away. But so Joey shoots Peter, but then Joey's just like, well, hey, since I'm a medic, like, I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna heal his wound. I'm gonna give him a bandage and send him on his way. And so Frank is like, okay, yeah, all you guys just leave this room and I'll stay because like I'm gonna be the one that's gonna like not at all listen to this girl and give in to absolutely everything that she wants, because Frank is the most easiest character to persuade out of everybody, it seems. The further and further we go into this film, the more we realize that Frank is the easiest person to, like, hey man, you want to just team up? Great. Like, I have completely not wanted to be the hero of this story. Like, I've given that up a long 20 seconds after this film started ago. So like, I am just full on like, how can I be the bad guy of this film? So Frank goes on is to be listening to all of Abigail's twines and tales of how Abigail will have Frank work with them and everything will be copacetic, and Abigail will let Frank like leave out of here scot-free. And Frank is like, you know what, I'll let you out, but you need to tell me how to get out of here. And so Abigail's like, well, sure, like, I'll tell you exactly where to go to get out of here. All you have to do after I tell you this is to let me out. You know what? If I was Frank, I would have just been like, no, because I need to confirm that that exit is available for me to do, and then I'll come back to you and then let you free. But Frank is just like, you know what? Like you're saying that your decision is to have had an expiration date. Well, my decision is to have had an expiration date. Ha 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 ha. And we kind of do the kind of back and forth thing, like, will Frank, won't Frank? Come on, Frank. Be the Legion hero that we know you can be. No, he's got to be the bad guy. And I like him for, I love him for that. So Frank goes on and is to just give in easily to this girl, not even knowing that his exit strategy is in the wings for him to use. And so Frank is, of course, tempted to open this door, and then he's like, no. And then finally Abigail is just like, you know what? Well, bam! Abigail could have went through the thing anytime she wanted. She was just waiting for one person to be there so she could just walk all over them and then murder them and then make her way onto other people to murder them. So that forces everybody to just be like, well, like, we got to get out of town. Like, we have to go on, and everybody just follow Frank to the library, that there's possibly an exit in that room, and we need to just hold up shop because technically there's light out, even though it's probably like 3:30 in the morning, supposedly they say, when they're talking about like light and whatever. Man, does time pass very quickly in this movie for whatever goofy reason. Man, if we had like a storm or something going on weather-wise in this movie, these characters would be effed. So, again, characters have made their way to the library, and we have them kind of locking all the doors and looking into the fire chimney to see if Abigail is going to be crawling her way creepingly, and we're having like Joey trying to figure out if there's any way that Abigail could come in here, if there's some kind of secret goofy thing. And so Joey's kind of looking at the window up above. It's like, well, okay, like this is our Alamo, this is our last stand. Right in this room, we have the sunlight, and if Abigail comes in here, we can just kind of force her into this window. And so, with Sammy being bitten, there's a possibility that Sammy herself could be a vampire. So, Sammy has to test whether or not she is one, so she puts her hand in the light, and she's like, oh, thank God, I'm not. And Peter even says, like, well, hey, before you even got in here, I saw the reflection of you in this pan and this thing here. So like we knew you weren't a vampire. Like good on you, kid. But hopefully that doesn't come back to bite me later, cause it will. So they all think that okay, Sammy, like maybe she didn't become the vampire, or they really don't ever have seen a horror movie in their life because being ever a werewolf, a zombie, vampire, anything, that takes some time to cook, if you know what I mean. That always takes some time to marinate. You don't become a zombie right out of the gate if you've been bitten. You don't become a werewolf right away after you've been bitten. Like werewolves, it takes a whole nother like night or full moon or whatever they have to put on their calendar. They have to make a date and whatever. So I didn't think that Sammy right out of the gate was just going to become a vampire. I didn't think that that was going to be how it was going to work. And I like how they did that in this story. So they're in the library waiting it out, just sweating it out. They're like, oh my god, we can't have like hours to waste here. Like, we all know that Abigail is just gonna come in here when it's nightfall and come after us all and murder us. So we have to have our characters come up with some kind of strategy to get out of the area they're in. Joey thinks that there's possibly like uh, a wall, a weak wall that they can kind of make their way through, and that fails. Then Sammy is like, "Oh my god, you know what? If this door, or if every one of the doors in this whole entire complex, as we have gone on to see in the early parts of this movie, which I now have to backpedal about, when Rickles was trying to leave, all of a sudden, like cages uh, and windows were being closed, and we had kind of the, I don't know if it was kind of a funny moment or not, but Rickles tries to go on and figure out a way to open up the door or the gated door, and then Peter is like, well, hey man, I'm just gonna tackle my way through this door. He bashes his way through, and it's like, yeah, that didn't work. Yeah, we're effed. Like, if I couldn't just Hulk my way through this, like, no, it's not gonna work out. So we have Sammy coming up with the idea that there might be some kind of tech way for her to unlock everything and for them to just get out of here. And I was thinking also, what about that window in the library? Why not you just bash through that window and get out of the house that way? Is it impossible to get to that window in that high part of the library? Man, if there was only a ladder somewhere. Or a bunch of books that you can continue to just stack one on top of the other to just get to that window to just get the F out. Again, strategies no one's using. So our characters are like, yeah, let's go with Sammy's strategy because it sounds the most sound and possibly another way a number of people could die while hoping that this is going to work. So, again, horror strategy goes as people separate. We have Sammy and Peter separate from Joey and Frank. And I'm like, oh man, I don't want Sammy to die, and I don't want Peter to die. And they're both together. Oh. So Sammy and Peter are having this kind of very emotional connection together as Sammy is starting, after spending some time in a pool of dead bodies earlier in the film, which again I have to rebuttal and bring up, seeing hundreds of dead bodies and having to go on and tell the group about the hundreds upon hundreds of dead bodies. Sammy is thinking like, man, like we're like, I'm never gonna make it home. Like there's no hope. And Peter is like, no, look at me. It's like you have somebody you care about, right? And Sam is like, well, yeah. And Peter's like, well, I'm gonna make sure that both of us are gonna get back to those people. And I'm like, yeah, that's all nice and good. But then Sammy is like her bite is now healed. Yeah. And Sammy is to go on and disappear behind Peter. And Sammy has tried to go on and say to Peter, "Help, help!" But her voice is muffled because Abigail is taking control. So Sammy goes on to disappear behind Peter and then shows up in front of Peter, bites into him, murders him, and I'm like, no! You! No! And so Peter dies, and so now Sammy is left doing this weird ballet dance that, of course, uh, Abigail is doing the exact same choreographing too. And I can go on and really appreciate that because I'm like, man, maybe like did both of them have to go on and both simultaneously together like take choreographing things to learn this dance from the same person? Because if they did it separately, it's like, man, like they nailed that separately. So both of them are doing this dance, both Abigail and both Sammy, telling them that they are kind of neurally, brain wise connected. They're connected, just like Iron Man 3. So Joey and Frank are just kind of making their way downtown as Sammy is to have said, like, oh, like, she's here, like, Frank died, and yeah. So Joey and Frank are now running to where Sammy is, like, thinking it's like, well, we don't know where the heck to go. Sammy seems to be the only one that's the tech person, so like we have to rely on her. So Joey and Frank make their way back to Sammy, and Sammy is to, of course, have her back to them. And I'm like that's an untrustworthy person. Sammy, show me them teeth. Show me that smile. Show me that there's probably something not going right with you, because you keep having your back to us, and there's something just off-putting about that. So Joey and Frank continue to talk to Sammy, and Sammy is having her back to them, and it gets to a point where it's like, finally, Sammy should really go on and face them. And it's like, okay, Sammy is now a vampire. Like, she's lost to us. Like, if anything, let's kind of just back up and let's get out of here. Because either way, like, Abigail could be, like, en route. We don't know. So, both Joey and Frank both book it back to the library. And so, Sammy makes her way to go after them. And there is not one thought between either Joey or Frank to just be like, well, hey, like, maybe we should try and save Sammy from death. Like, maybe we should try to figure out a way to maybe, like, cure her or drug her or something, like they did with Abigail. No. Right out of the gate, they're like, we have to just murder Sammy. And so we have Joey who grabs this reflective surface that kind of goes on to ricochet the light, or kind of reposition the light to then hit Sammy and just explode her body. I was like, wow, okay, I guess that's how we're doing vampire deaths in this film. Holy that is some just massive explosion. But then again, I guess that is the only real vampire of this movie that had died so far, so whatever, I guess. So now we're back to one vampire, because before we had dose. But so we have Sammy who is talking through Abigail, or vice versa. We're having Abigail talking through Sammy. Anyways, and Abigail is mentioning how she hates this library room and all these things, but it won't matter because Sammy's gonna explode, die, and redecorate the place with her blood. And and so Joey and now Frank are the only two left standing. And Frank had gone on to grab the book that is to supposedly be the secret door that Abigail had told him to go to for him to be able to escape the library. And Frank went on to pull this this book, and it didn't work. And so Frank is just pulling all the other books, and none of it works. And so Frank is just like, fuck, like she lied to me. But a secret door had opened regardless. So both Joey and Frank decide to, like, hey, let's figure out what's in this secret door. And it's probably Abigail, anyways, but let's just find out. So Joey and Frank go through this secret door to lead them to Lampert, who's been watching through these security cams the whole entire X number of hours. Maybe he went on to grab a lunch, grab a snack, force Eisenberg to make drugs. I don't know. But Joey and Frank go on to meet up with Lampert, and we come to find that Lampert is a vampire himself. And Lampert has his own agenda. And instead of going on and having Lampert really just thinking, like, you know what? How am I bring Joey in on this endeavor? Like, strength in numbers, right? I can have both Frank and both Joey just kind of being brought into the I'm going to bite them endeavor and have them turn into vampires, and have all three of us work against Abigail to strong arm Abigail. No, like, Lampert, for some goofy reason, is very much like, well, hey, I've prior worked with Frank and we have some history together. So Lampert goes on and make Frank an offer. It's like, well, hey, like, look at me, man. Like, I'm a vampire, but hey, man, like I'm very weathered. I've had my seasons. And so Lampert ends up turning to Frank. It's like, well, hey, like, I can just kind of turn you, and you can help me out beat not only Abigail and kill her, but then also turn around and kill Kristoff, and then we can own everything. Like, we can own the franchise. Like, we can be the New York Yankees. Wouldn't it be great, Frank? And of course, Frank, with his easily persuading like way about him, Frank is like, hey man, bite me. Sounds good. Go ahead, give me a big old chunk of that neck. You know what I'm saying? Just, yeah, go ahead. And so Lampert goes on and bites Frank. And weirdly, Frank is just like, he's getting this blood being put into his mouth. But then weirdly, Frank is like spewing out all this blood from out of his mouth. And like, he's doing all kinds of stuff. Like, what the heck is going on with Frank? Is he going to explode or something? What's going on? This is so weird. Plus, I was actually hoping that maybe there is some weird, bizarre vampire side effect that not every single person in the universe can easily turn into a vampire, that there might be some side effect. But no, that doesn't play out in this movie either. So Lampert goes on and then turns Frank, and then now Frank turns around and then kills Lampert, and now Frank is just like, well, hey, I'm my own boss. Ha ha ha. Because Lampert back was turned, and so Frank is just like, well, I'm going to kill Lampert while he's not noticing. And so now we have only Frank and Joey left, and Abigail on her way. So Frank decides, since he's going to outstrength Joey, because she's the only one left, Frank goes on and is to want to first, like, try and kill Joey. And Frank is like, hey, you better run. You better run. And then so Joey runs off. And so that's, of course, when Abigail is like, well, hey, like, we need to team up together because, hey, I'm definitely not going to be good enough to face off against Frank. So, like, Pinkies, like, truce, like, hey, like, if we fight off Frank, like, you'll get out of here scot free. Collect your $200 after you pass go. So Joey is just kind of like in the middle of this. She's like, dude, I'm gonna get just torn apart by both these vampires, and that's pretty much what happens. So Abigail and Joey decide to team up together against Frank. Frank goes on and is to put this rod into Joey's chest, and Frank is just beating the crap out of Abigail to the point of Abigail is doing all these kind of weird positioning with her body. Like, her body looks like she's just getting broken in half for how she's just accordioning her body to just have all these like weird positions. It's wild. And I was like, man, either if that's the legit actor or the stunt double, like, bravo. Bravo with that. Like, how that really looks, as bad as it does and cool as it does, bravo. So Frank then continues to bite into Abigail. I'm like, man, how much blood does it take to, like, drain a vampire? Because Frank is really biting into this girl, and she still has like 1,000,000 pints of blood still left in her body, it seems. And so Frank then goes back to Joey. It's like, well, hey, like, I'm just going to turn you and then force you to kill Abigail because story. So Frank forces Joey to be pushed all the way through this rod and then bites her and then puppets her to just be like, hey, I'm controlling you. Like, Frank says, do this, and you do it. So Frank tells Joey to kill Abigail, and so as Joey is to try and start to battle against Abigail, Joey then turns around and tries to fight with Frank, but this seems to be a losing battle. And also, again, Frank needs to bite Abigail for the 30th time to lose another 80 pints of blood. But so, as pinkies keep happening in this whole fight scene, so Pinky swear, hey, we had a pact. So we have this all come to a head as both Joey and both Abigail at some point finally figure out a way to work together to murder Frank, then to just turn around and have Kristoff just appear and just be like, hey, I showed up. Aren't you glad that I showed up? Like, man, like, I could have been here, like, I don't know, like 2 hours ago, but like, I was just having a time. I was just having a party. Like, since like you weren't at home, like, I was just popping champagne bottles and watching all kinds of R-rated movies and eating all kinds of food that I haven't been able to eat in I don't know how long. Just chowing down. And so Kristoff the whole time is taking a big whiff at Joey because since now Frank is dead, we then turn around and realize that, like, well, like, Joey could be killed off here. And there was also the one scene where, like, Abigail, like, just loses her hand because of the sunlight. Like, that was a pretty cool scene, too, that I completely forgot about that I have to rebuttal now. Too many rebuttals. I'm going to try to get out of here before 3 hours. So, God, why are my videos so long? I'm sorry. Maybe because I whine and complain about them too much. But so, because I don't I don't realize at all how long the video is, and I should really try to do like one movie or one thing at one video. So Kristoff comes in and is to be like, hey, Joey, you better book it out of town because, like, it's about mealtime and you're looking pretty good right now. So, Abigail and both Joey are talking about the kid and how, like, Abigail's like, well, hey, don't miss this opportunity to really step up and be there for your kid. Like, of course, my dad wasn't really there for me. So, like, come on, like, this is your opportunity. This is your second chance. Like, you better take it. So, Joey walks off, goes into the van to get the heck out of there because she is to now be human. And because I guess her killing the person who had bitten her had now unvampired her, because that's, I guess, somehow how certain stories work for vampires. It all kind of depends. But I guess for this story, that's how it works. So we have Joey who gets in the van, puts in the lollipop, and we end the film. There isn't any end credit scene. There's nothing like that. It's because I went all the way to the end and there was nothing. Because, like, well, there shouldn't probably be an end credit scene anyways, because what further can they go on with this movie? Could they just say that one of the characters just got out of there alive? Could they have said that Peter is now a vampire? Because he just got bitten, or he just got his neck just bitten, and, like, maybe that's a loose end. Yeah. um Maybe in the sequel Joey becomes Buffy the Vampire Slayer and just goes after Kristoff. Who knows? But with that said, we even had a point where Joey was to have called her son and was to give this, like, one last emotional thing, realizing that Frank was going to be walking in on her making this phone call and going to kill her. So at least she did that. At least she gave that one last message. But so with that said, I'm going to give my one last message. Saying I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. Hopefully, I can go on and do a lot more reviews, but this one probably took forever to do. Because there was a lot of certain stopping of like second guessing of what I was going to say here, but then also hoping that I was going to say every bit of what happens in these movies. Hopefully, I'll go on and I will in the future do. Uh, I'm still planning on doing. Oh God. The Fall Guy and Boy Kills World. I had seen those days ago, and I'm gonna have to remember everything that happens in those movies now. But it's been days. I'm going to have to do episode 5 of Go Go Loser Ranger. That came out. I'm gonna have to do that now. Um, Beyond that, I'm sure there's a billion other things that I probably should actually be reviewing right now, like Imaginary. Eh, that's that movie's kind of been out for far too long now. But maybe if I keep doing these combination reviews, I can probably slip that one in because it's a new released film, anyways. Other than that, I'm sure I'm probably gonna get some kind of like, why aren't you doing more reviews, or why aren't you doing this kind of review? Or there's probably something that I probably did promise, and I'm just kind of like, I'm just trying to find something that's freaking just a trending thing. A real trending thing. Cause man, I found that once, but those times have sailed. So that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.